So today is Nazir Daf Dal and Nazir 4, and we're in the middle of a sugya on the bottom of 3b, where the Mishnah has said that if you take a vow from one aspect of Nazirus, Chartzanim, Ozah, the seeds or the skin, or saying I'm just not going to get a haircut, I'm a Nazir not to get a haircut, or from a dead body, then under those circumstances, this person is indeed going to be a Nazir. Meaning to say, even though you just took a vow from one aspect of Nazirus, we're going to say that that you can't do that, and so therefore you're entirely a Nazirite. So the Gemara then says this position that if you take a vow from one aspect of a Nazirus, you're a Nazir in all aspects of your life. This is the position of the Rabbanan. But Masnisin, we're in 3b, around 7 lines from the bottom. But our Mishnah is the low Rabbi Shimon, is not like Rabbi Shimon, because what did Rabbi Shimon say? He said, Eino chayev ad sheyadur mikulam. He says, you're not going to be liable until you take a vow from every aspect of Nazirus. He says, you're not a Nazarite until you take a vow from every aspect of Nazirus. So the Gemara says, Rabbina, that's the position of Rabbi Shimon. Whereas the Rabbanan say, even if you only take it out from one aspect of it, you're going to be a Nazarite. So the Gemara says, what's the reasoning for Rabbi Shimon, who says you have to take a vow from the entire Nazirus in order to be considered a Nazir? My time to Rabbi Shimon. Amar Kra, Rabbi Shimon is based upon a verse. It says, from everything that is done, from the grapevine, from the wine, to the seed, to the skin. Meaning to say you have to do it from everything. That's what the verse is saying. The Rabbanan say, yeah, we have a different verse, the earlier verse. My time, it says, from wine and shechar is aged wine in this context, Yazir, you refrain. We see from here that even if you just say you're a Nazir from one of them, you're a Nazir from all of them. Rabbi Shimon Nami Haksiv Miyayin v'Shechar Yazir. So Rabbi Shimon also has that pasuk Miyayin and Shechar you shall separate. Gemara says no, that Rabbi Shimon uses that verse to teach us that even if you took that even though there's wine that's a mitzvah for you to drink, once you become a Nazir, it's prohibited for you to drink that wine. And the Gemara says, well, what's the wine that's a mitzvah, but a Nazirite can still not drink it? Kedusha v'avdalta. This refers to the wine of Kiddush and the wine of Havdalah. So the Gemara, and we'll top the approach of most of the Rishonim here, and not the Mefarish. The Gemara assumes that wine, it's not a mitzvah from the Torah to drink wine. Yeah, sure, there are aspects of Kiddush that are biblical, the sanctification of Shabbos, but not the drinking of the wine specifically. So the Gemara in that context asks the question, you're not commanded to drink wine from Sinai. Why would we think that, why would we need a verse to tell us that prohibitions of a Nazir don't override the mitzvah of drinking wine on Shabbos? It's not a mitzvah to drink wine on Shabbos for Kiddush and for Havdalah. It's rabbinically a mitzvah, but not biblically a mitzvah. So therefore, why do we need this verse to tell us Yayin and Shechar, to tell us that a Nazirite does not override a mitzvah? Like the following, we're on the top of Daled Amud Aleph, like the following teaching of Rabbah. Let's say a person says a shvua she'eshteh. Person says, I'm going to take an oath that I'm going to drink wine. V'chazar v'amar hareini Nazir. And then he says, oh, I'm a Nazirite. So guess what? You don't drink. Asya Nazirus chayla al shvua. Your oath is overridden by the vow of the Nazirite because of this verse. Miyayin v'shechar yazir. The Rabbanan nami ami ba'alei laser yayin mitzvah kiyam. So how did the Rabbanan know this law that wine, that it's a mitzvah is prohibited to a Nazirite? So Gemara says, because the Rabbanan say, it would have just had to say from wine, why does it say aged wine? Shmas minat darti. The Rabbanan say we learn from here two things. We learn from here that wine of a mitzvah does not override a Nazir. And we also learn from here that even if you just take a vow from one aspect of it, you're going to be considered a Nazir. Rabbi Shimon, Hainu Taima Dachsev Shechar. So according to Rabbi Shimon, who uses that pasuk Miyayim V'Shechar to teach us that the wine of a Nazir does not, the prohibitions of a Nazir do not override a mitzvah. Why does he need the word Shechar? Oh, he says it's to teach us the following law. There's a separate law by entering into the temple that you're not allowed to enter into it after you have drunk wine. And we learned that out by comparing Shechar and Mikdash. It says in the pasuk with respect to the prohibition of entering the temple after you drink Shechar, aged wine. Wine and aged wine you cannot drink, you and your children with you. Magabi Nazir, says Rabbi Shimon, just like by a Nazirite, Yayin hu the Witzar, Aval Shar Mashkin Lo, just like by a Nazirite, the prohibition is not on drinking whiskey or vodka, it's on drinking wine. So too, Afkabi Mikdash Nami, Yayin hu the Witzar, Aval Shar Mashkin Hamashtakan Lo. So too, we learn from the word Shechar as it's written by Nazir and also by the Mikdash to teach us that it only applies to the prohibition of entering the temple with wine, that applies to wine, but not other alcoholic beverages. And says the Gemara, this position of Rabbi Shimon is lafuke mid Rabbi Yehuda. It's to tell us that Rabbi Shimon is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer achal devela kiila. So let's say you ate a cake of figs, which is the cake of figs is alcoholic, it's fermented. V'shasa dvash, or you drink honey, alcoholic honey. V'cholav, you drink alcoholic milk. Milk used to be commonly served as alcoholic, otherwise it would spoil. V'nichnas l'mikdash, and then you entered into the temple. Chayev, you're going to be liable. So that's the case. We see from here, Rabbi Yehuda says that Shechar can't be to exclude that, because so Rabbi Shimon's position that if you drink whiskey and then enter into the temple, you're not liable. That's to say he's not like Rabbi Yehuda, who says you will be liable. Alternatively, what does Rabbi Shimon do with the word Shechar? Rabbi Shimon lays like Iser Chalal Iser. It's to tell us that Rabbi Shimon is not, in general, he does not. The problem is Rabbi Shimon in general does not follow that if you have one prohibition, that another prohibition, so he does not hold from this concept of one prohibition can apply to another prohibition. I mean, once you have one prohibition, he doesn't say that there could be another prohibition. We'll see. And so why do we need that over here? Look at what Tosafos says. Pirush ba'alma. In general, Rabbi Shimon does not say a prohibition, once there's one prohibition, it can apply upon another prohibition. And so therefore, once there's a prohibition to drink wine, we wouldn't think there's another prohibition. So therefore, this is how Tosafos explains it. If we didn't have a verse telling us they prohibit to drink the Shechar, Havamina, I would have said, just like you took an oath not to drink wine, and then you took a vow to become a Nazirite, and then you drink the wine. I would have thought you only have one prohibition. I would have thought you're only liable for violating your oath not to drink wine, but you're not liable for the vow of Nazirus. Kamash Malan. So we learn from this extra verse the miyayim v'shechar of that pasuk. The nishbash olishto kos 7 nadav v'nazir v'avar v'shata kos the lucky tray. We learn that you're liable for 2 ashes. Tosafos says mishum shvuasu mishum nazirus, one for your oath and one for the nazirus. So that's what Rabbi Shimon says we need the verse shechar according to this alternative approach. To teach you you're liable for two lashes. Because in general, he says there's no prohibition on another prohibition. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, he says if you eat a non-kosher animal on Yom Kippur, you're exempt from Yom Kippur because you're already liable for the prohibition of eating the non-kosher. Well, Rabbanan Namiak, so the Gemara says, okay, back to the Rabbanan who say that if you take a vow on one thing, then you're a Nazir, you don't need to include everything. So what do they do with the pasuk Mikol Asher Ye'aseh, which is the source for Rabbi Shimon's halacha, that if you that you need to take a vow on all aspects of a Nazir to be a Nazirite. The Rabbanan Nami Aksev Mikol Asher Ye'aseh Mikefan Hayayin. So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan would say, Hasam, we made Ali Surei Nazir Shemitztar from Zamzeh. That teaches us that in order to be liable for being a Nazirite, you need to consume a kazayas. And it could be combined the olive size amount from different aspects of the grapevine. the grape, the skin, the seed, different aspects can make a kazayas. The Rabbi Shimon will isolate here. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold from this idea that in order to be liable, you need to have this combination. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shalamakos. If you get lashes, any amount you'll be liable for lashes. We don't need the tziruf. And lo amru kazayas and lo inyan karban. Rabbi Shimon says the only reason why you do a kazayas in general is if you accidentally ate something, so you bring a karban chatas. But by a Nazirite, you don't bring a chatas. But by a Nazirite, we're going to say that's not relevant. That's not relevant. Meaning to say, what does it mean when Rabbi Shimon says leis tziruf? Tosfos explains, Komar ein tzarich yitor with tziruf. He doesn't need this pasuk to teach us this law of tziruf. That even by other prohibitions like chelav and dav, mechayav b'chol shehu, that you're going to be liable with any amount. And why do we say v'lo amru kazai sel karban? The only time you need an olive size amount by Nazirite is to bring a sacrifice. V'hacha lo shayach tziruf karban. But by Nazirite, we don't need tziruf for a sacrifice. Karban Nazir eino ba el shashasa yayin el malchus. The carbon bal shamas nitro. You only bring the carbon not for drinking wine. You don't bring a sacrifice if you drink wine by Nazirite. You just get lashes, and then when you're finished, you bring the carbon. So therefore, that's why we don't need this law of tziruf by Nazirite according to Rabbi Shimon. Also, so now we move into a slightly new topic. If a person says Hareini k'Shimshon, basically says I'm a Nazirite like Shimshon, or k'ben Manoach, or like Ben Manoach, or k'bal Dalila, or like Dalila, Kamisha Akar Dalasos Asa. These are all actions that Shimshon did, like somebody who uprooted the doors of Asa. Kamisha Nekro pushed him as like someone who the Philistines uprooted their eyes. Arez and Nazir Shimshon. Well, guess what? Then you're a Nazirite like Shimshon. But our Gemara is going to interpret it that it's not if you said one of these things, but if you said only all of these things, because otherwise we don't know that you're really the Nazirite of Shimshon. So for the Gemara, why do we need to list all these cases? So the Gemara says, you need to list all of them. The Amar Hareini Shimshon, if you just said, I'm like Samson, Havamina, Shimshon Achrina, you might have said, I'm like a different Samson. Kamashmalon Keben Manoach. So therefore, we're like Ben Manoach. V'itana Keben Manoach, if you said, I'm like the Ben Manoach, Havamina, you might have said, Ika Demiskriyacha. There's somebody whose name is that. Kamashmalon Kabal Dalila. Therefore, like the husband of Dalila, and like somebody who the Philistines knocked out his eyes. So now the Gemara says, okay, what's a Nazir of Shimshon? Nazir Olam or Nazir Shimshon? What's the difference between somebody who says I'm a Nazirite forever and somebody who says I'm a Nazirite like Shimshon? Nazir Olam, so the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, I'll tell you the difference. Nazir Olam, this is a strange law. People probably didn't know, the first time I read it, it was shocking to me. Nazir Olam or Nazir Shimshon. Nazir Olam, a person who says I'm a Nazirite forever, once his hair grows too heavy and too long, make a batar. He's actually allowed to cut it off with his hair. He's allowed to cut it off with a scissor. But maybe shalosh beimos. And he brings the 3 sacrifices you bring at the end of your Nazirus, and then he goes back and to being a Nazir. Vim nitma, and if he became accidentally tamei, maybe karban tuma. Then he brings the sacrifices that you bring. When you finish your Nazirite, you bring the olah, the chatas, and the shlamim. When you finish, but if you became tamei in the middle by coming in contact with their body, you bring the olah, chatas, and the asham. And the olah and the chatas are birds by that case. That's called the karban tuma. Nazir Shimshon, but unlike this, Nazir and Shimshon, on the one hand, it's very stringent. He can never cut his hair, even if his hair gets long. But also, however, the opposite way is a leniency. If he came in contact with a dead body in the middle of his Nazirus, maybe karban tuma. He does not bring a karban tuma. That seems to be that the Nazirite, somebody says I'm a Nazirite Shimshon, he doesn't bring a karban if he comes in contact with a dead body. So first of all, the Gemara says, who's talking about Nazir Olam? All of a sudden, Nazir Olam, Mandachar Shmei. Who mentioned its name? What does it have to do with the price of tea in China? So the Gemara says, Chisuri Mechsara. So our Mishnah was missing some words. This is what our Mishnah was saying. Omer Hareini Nazir Olam. Somebody who says, I'm a Nazirite forever, Harez and Nazir. Then the person is a Nazirite forever. Ma be Nazir Olam or Nazir Shimshon. What's the distinction between somebody who's a Nazirite forever and somebody who's a Nazirite for Shimshon? Nazir Olam, the Nazir Olam, if his hair gets too heavy, he can cut it. Maybe Shalosh behemos, and he brings the 3 animals. V'im nitma, and also if he comes in contact with the dead body, maybe carbon tuma, he brings the carbon tuma. Whereas Nazir Shimshon, whereas the Nazarite for Shimshon, hichbet se'aro, eno mekel batar. That the Nazarite for Shimshon, if his hair becomes too heavy, he's not allowed to cut it off. We're on the top of 4b. The eno maybe carbon, and he also the Nazir Shimshon does not bring a carbon. Meaning to say, if he comes in contact with a dead body, he doesn't have to bring an animal. So the Gemara asks, Tumos carbon hudu amaisi. You mean to say he doesn't bring a carbon in the Nazir Shimshon, according to our Mishnah, if he came in contact with a dead body of a Nazirus Chayil, but you mean to say that he's still a Nazirite? Mani mas nisin. Meaning to say, what do you mean he's still a Nazirite? That he's not allowed to come in contact with the dead body. He doesn't bring a sacrifice, but ideally he's not supposed to come in contact with the dead body. That's what our Mishnah is saying. So then who's the author of our Mishnah? Because lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Shimon, because then our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, because we're going to the price, so Rabbi Yehuda says, Nazir Shimshon, mutar l'tamei l'mesim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can, even lechatchila, even ideally come in contact with the dead body. She came matzina b'Shimshon, shenitma, because we find Shimshon came in contact with the dead bodies. And the Gemara is going to ask where we see that. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Omer, Nazir Shimshon, Omer Klum. Rabbi Shimon says, somebody who says I'm a Nazir like Samson says nothing. Shalom Matzina b'Shimshon sheyatza Naziris mipiv. Because we don't find by Samson that he ever actually became a Nazirite. He never said I'm a Nazir. So Rabbi Yehuda says he can come in contact with that body. And Rabbi Shimon says he's not even a Nazirite. Shimshon wasn't even a Nazirite. If you say Hareini Shimshon, you're nothing, because Shimshon never took a vow of Nazirus upon himself. So the Gemara says, so who's the author of our Mishnah? Money, Rabbi Yehuda, Rafiul Chatchila. If you want to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says even Chatchila, you could come in contact with a dead body. Masnisin Katani Initma, and our Mishnah says if you became tummy, you don't bring a carbon, which means that Chatchila you can't. And he Rabbi Shimon, Ha'amar Lo Chayil Nazirus Klal. Rabbi Shimon says, if you say Hareini Shimshon, you're not a Nazirite at all. So the Gemara says, "Oh, Rabbi Yehuda." So the Gemara says, "Oh no, our Mishnah is really like Rabbi Yehuda," and we're going to say, "I v'katani gabi Nazir oam nitma, tani nami gabi Nazir shimshon nitma." So the only reason why it uses the language of b'diavad is because by somebody who's a Nazirite forever, it uses the language as if he became tamei, he brings the carbon tuma. So therefore, for that reason, it says that by shimshon, if he became tamei, he doesn't bring a carbon. But really, it's lichatchila, he can become tamei. So Gemara says, "Lema pukta dahani tanai." So let us say that this dispute between Rabbi Yehuda, who says l'chatchila you can become a tamei, and Rabbi Shimon, who says you're not even a Nazir in the first place. If you say you're like Shimshon, I'd say it's actually connected to a different dispute which we learned back in the Dharm. So you'll remember it. If a person says it has a loaf of bread in front of them, and he says "Harei alai k'bachor." He says, I'm bold, I'm like a loaf of bread. So Rabbi Yaakov is going to be in the position that that loaf of bread is prohibited upon him, just like an oser, just like a bechor is a firstborn animal, is an animal that's prohibited. So this loaf of bread is prohibited. Whereas Rabbi Yossi is going to Mati. Rabbi Yossi says that you're going to be permitted. Why? Rabbi Yehuda Savar law to Rabbi Yaakov. So Rabbi Yehuda says that if you take a vow to be a Nazir like Shimshon, he was like Rabbi Yaakov, who says the Amar Robayinam Davar Nidar. That Rabbi Yaakov is saying, just like the firstborn animal is automatically holy, and still you can associate yourself with it and become prohibited. So Shimshon, even though he was holy from birth, like this firstborn animal, if you compare yourself to him, you're going to be a Nazir. Rabbi Shimon said like Rabbi Yossi, whereas Rabbi Shimon says we compare him to Rabbi Yossi, who says that if you compare yourself to a firstborn animal, it's not a vow. The loaf of bread is not prohibited because you want to make the loaf of bread prohibited, but nobody made the firstborn animal prohibited. The firstborn animal was born prohibited, so it can't be used as a hatfasa, as an association to make a vow. So to Shimshon, since he was a Nazir from the womb, he's not going to be able to be associated. Somebody can't associate themselves with him in order to make themselves a Nazirite. Gemara says no. Everybody says you need to associate yourself with something that was once permitted and became prohibited in order to make it a vow. But the Shani Gavi Bechor, but the case of Bechor is different because there's a specific verse. It says in the pasuk by a Bechor, it says Ishkidur Neder La Hashem. And so therefore, since it says the word Hashem by a vow, it's Larabos as a Bechor. That means it comes to include a firstborn animal which was always sanctified to God. Rabbi Yossi Amracha Hashem. So Rabbi Yossi says, no, the verse Hashem is to tell you that if you compare yourself, if you compare the loaf of bread, it'd say it's like a chatas or an asham, then it's going to be prohibited to you. Why? Why is Rabbi Yossi comparing it to a chatas and an asham, these guilt offerings, and not to and saying the firstborn is not going to be able to be used as that fasa to make it a vow? It says Marabani chatas v'asham shekim matfisa b'neder. So he says, I can compare he says, I'm going to include the chatas and the asham because even though he has to bring them, nevertheless, you have to sanctify them and in order to make them holy. Whereas I exclude the firstborn animal because you don't sanctify it to make it holy. Rabbi Yaakov says, no, yes, also firstborn animal. Before Nami Matfisa ben Neder, also firstborn animal, you sanctify it to make it holy. How so? The Tanya, Shabbeis Rabbeinu Amru, that even if you have a firstborn animal born in your flock, it's still a mitzvah to sanctify it. So the Gemara says, yeah, but so what? Rabbi Yossi Amracha, the mitzvah yeah, it's a mitzvah to sanctify it, but he won't maktishlei milo kadosh. But if you didn't sanctify it, it would still be sanctified. So you're not doing anything by sanctifying it; it's already sanctified. And the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Gabi Nazir Nami Aksiv Hashem. By Nazirite also it says the word of Hashem. The word by Hashem doesn't just appear by a Nadir and by a Bechor, it also appears by a Nazirite. Nazir Hashem. So therefore, you should be able to be matfisit to a Nazir and become. And if you say a Reni Shimshon, you should be a Nazirite. So the Gemara says, no. Why did it say Hashem by a Nazirite? To tell you, this to teach us the following thing. It's to teach us that a person who becomes a Nazirite has to do it for the right reasons, and that's what Shimon HaTzadik says. So we'll look at this very powerful Brisa from Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik says, he says, in my whole life, I never ate from the carbon of a Nazir, an Asham, which he brought after he became Tameh accidentally. Because I always felt that he regretted that he became a Nazir. Once he became Tameh, he regretted that he became a Nazir in the first place. And so therefore, his sacrifice, it was like he was bringing chul and non-sacred animal into the courtyard. I always felt like he had regrets, the Nazirite. I didn't trust that he was really sincere. Except for one person, he came to me from the south. He was a good-looking guy, had beautiful eyes and a beautiful appearance. The kutzo sav sedura slow, taltalim, and his hair was so beautiful. And amartilo, and I said to him, I said to him, Shimon HaTzadik said, I said to this man, why are you destroying such beautiful hair? Amar li. He said, I was a shepherd for my father in his town. And I went to drink water from the spring. And I looked at my face in the mirror, in the river. I saw my appearance. And I started to tremble. And then as a consequence, I felt like I was going to sin. Amartilo, I said to the Yetzer Hara, Reika, you empty one, you wicked Yetzer Hara. Why are you so arrogant? On what basis are you so arrogant? You think you're so good looking, so you're arrogant? In the end, you're just a maggot and a worm. I promise you, I'm going to cut you off to heaven because I'm going to cut off your hair because a Nazirite, he grows his hair long, but then he has to remove it all completely at the end of his Nazirus. So, Shimon HaTzadik says, I stood up and I kissed him on his head. May there be many more Nazirites like you in Israel, because you're sincere. You became a Nazirite for the right reason. What was your reason? You intended to recognize that you're too vain. And so therefore you became a Nazirite in order to come closer to Hashem. As it states, Alecha Kasav Omer, Ishki Afilu Endur Nazir, Nazir Hashem. That you are taking a vow for a Nazarite for the right reasons. And so therefore, that's the reason why you're a Nazarite. So therefore I'll eat from your Korban Hashem. So that's why it says Nazir Hashem, not to tell us that the vow takes place even if he didn't, even if he was born as a Nazarite, but to tell us that the Nazarite has to be done for the right reason. So that's what Rabbi Yossi would say. So the Gemara says, the Shimshon Rav Nazir, you mean Shimshon wasn't a Nazarite? Meaning to say Shimshon, what do we mean by this question? As you mean to say didn't take a vow, and that's why you needed to say the special teaching. It says that the angel said to Shimshon's mother that he's going to be a Nazarite from the womb. And so the Gemara understands that the angel in that story in Judges chapter 13 is commanding him, the father has to take a vow to be a Nazarite. So the Gemara says, no, the angel is not commanding the father to be a Nazarite. The angel is prophesizing. So Gemara says, we know and did okay, we had assumed from the beginning that Shimshon came in contact with the dead body. Well, where did we learn that? If you want to say it's based upon the pasuk in Judges 15, where Shimshon says, with the jawbone of the donkey, I killed 1,000 men. Maybe he just threw it at them and he didn't actually touch them. How do you know he was liable? It says Samson killed 30 men, and then he took their garments. Clearly, he took it off them after they're dead. So that proves that he came in contact with the dead. I said, no, maybe maybe he took off their garments and then killed them. That's not what it says. It says he struck them down and then he took it. The Dilma goes in Shavinan. Well, maybe he took it from them while they're, after he struck them down, but they're still like quivering. They're not dead yet. So Gemara says, Gemara Gemira. No, we have a tradition that Samson came in contact with the dead. All right, we'll stop here. We have Shach. We're going to dive in, God willing.